we can start. Is it not so?
Recording
Yes,
in
Chairperson, we can
progress.
start.
Okay. Good morning, honorable members, members of SCOA, our support staff, members of the public on the platform, National Treasury. Today we were having a presentation by National Treasury on the Appropriation Bill and the second adjustment Appropriation Bill. You'd remember, oral members, that Standing Committee on Finance have dealt with the fiscal framework, and it was adopted by Parliament. And then we engaged on the process of a division of revenue bill, which is a bill which deals with the allocations of the national raised revenue amongst the three spheres of government. Then there was a portion which then goes to national government, which is the reason why we are meeting today. We are looking at the Appropriation Bill and the second adjustment Appropriation Bill, which deals with the allocation that has been given to the national sphere of government. I think that's the brief background. This is in accordance with the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Act and the PFMA. So, oral members will allow National Treasury to take us through the presentation. You know how we do it, and after that we'll engage with the presentation. But before we proceed, can I check, Darren, do we have any apologies?
No, Chairperson, we didn't receive any apologies for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Let's then proceed with the presentation. Dr. Mampo, plus minus 45 minutes. Please come in, your team. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. Thank you so much, Chair, for this opportunity to do the presentation. I'm going to ask Nompumelelo Khatebe to do both the Appropriation Bill and the second adjustments Appropriation Bill presentation. I'm sure she won't take the 45 minutes. Nompumelelo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mampo. Good morning, Chair and honorable members and all the other meeting participants. I'm not sure, Chair, if I can project the presentation on my side because the sharing screen is disabled. So if I can be given access, I'm happy to project on my side.
Darren?
I've already done that, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Chairperson, can I be given guidance if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can. We can. I think everybody can see the screen. There you go. It's much better now.
Thank you so much, and good morning once again to everyone. Chair, as Mampo mentioned, the presentation is going to be in two parts. The first part, I'm going to cover the 2022 Appropriation Bill, and then the last part of the presentation, or the second part, will then talk to the second adjustments Appropriation Bill. In terms of the outline of the presentation, as per usual, the first part of the presentation, we're just going to do a recap of the legislative framework and the parliamentary process that governs the Appropriation Bill. And then we will then go into the structure of the bill itself and then talk to the specific contents of the bill, being the 2022-23 appropriations. And then the last part of the presentation will then cover the second adjustments Appropriation Bill. So just again, in terms of background, the recap, the Section 27 in the Public Finance Management Act is a section that requires the Minister of Finance to table the annual budget for the financial year before the National assembly, and that's before the start of the financial year or in exceptional circumstances on a date as soon as possible after the beginning of the financial year. And then section 27.3 then goes into the specific details of what the annual budget must take into consideration in terms of the format, and essentially what some of the areas that it highlights there that need to be taken into consideration and included in the budget would be the estimates of the revenue, the estimates of expenditure, as well as estimates in terms of your interest and debt service charges, the direct charges against the National Revenue Fund, and any other information as may be prescribed in the format that is issued by the National Treasury. So this is just a recap to remind us of the legislative framework that informs the budget. And then when it comes to the appropriation bill itself, it's important to once again highlight that the appropriation bill and ultimately the act, when it's enacted into law, is essentially the legislation that provides for the appropriation of money by Parliament from the National Revenue Fund in terms of Section 213 of the Constitution, as well as Section 26 of the Public Finance Management Act. Now, if we look at the Section 213 specifically of the Constitution, it provides that money may be withdrawn from the National Revenue Fund, but only in terms of an act of Parliament or as a direct charge. And then while Section 26, on the other hand, provides that Parliament must appropriate money for each financial year for the requirements of the state. And then when we look at the Money Bills and Related Matters Amendment Act, Section 7.1 provides that the Minister of Finance must table the annual budget as set out in Section 27 at the same time as the Appropriation Bill, which is what was essentially done. We tabled the Appropriation Bill, the Minister of Finance tabled the Appropriation Bill on the 23rd of February this year. And the Appropriation Bill essentially just proposes to appropriate money from the National Revenue Fund for the 2022-23 financial year, and which is the year under discussion, as well as to prescribe conditions for spending of funds withdrawn for the 2023-24 financial year. So this is just a background to remind us of the legislative framework. Now, when we then move on to the parliamentary process, which I'm sure honorable members are familiar with, starting off with the Money Bills Amendments Procedure and Related Matters Act, it sets out Parliament's role in the budget process and also enhances stakeholder participation and coordination. And this committee, as alongside the Standing Committee on Finance, are the ones that will then deal with matters related to the budget. And then the individual portfolio committees would then deal with the budget and strategic plans for each of the national departments, while the Standing Committee on Public Accounts will then deal with all the post-facto issues raised by the Auditor General as part of the audit process. And then, as Chair alluded to in his introductory remarks, first you deal with the fiscal framework, and then the Division of Revenue Act, and then now we consider the Appropriation Bill because those two have already been dealt with. So that's again just to a recap of the parliamentary process. And then looking at the parliamentary process, again, specifically the issue of amendments that govern the appropriation bill process. Again, to just recap on some of the key process related issues is that if there are proposals by the committee to make any amendments in the appropriation bill, there must be a reason indicated for the proposed amendments. There must also be a demonstration of how the amendment will take into account the broad strategic priorities of the relevant budget as well. And very importantly, the impact of any proposed amendment on must also be indicated in terms of the balance between capital and the current spending in the voted department as an example. And then just finally, it's very important to also set out the manner in which the amendment relates to the prevailing departmental strategic plans reports of the Auditor General Committee reports adopted by the House, because it's important that we make sure that everything then is aligned with the planning related elements as well. Now, in terms of the 2022 Appropriation Bill, Chair, again, to just highlight some of the key provisions in legislation, Section 8.3 of the Money Bills Amendment and Related Procedures Act notes that the Committee on Finance must, within 16 days or as soon as reasonable, submit a report to the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces on the fiscal framework and the revenue proposals. And then Section 9.3 of the same Act notes that then the division of revenue must then be passed within 35 days after the adoption of the fiscal framework by Parliament, or as soon as reasonably possible thereafter. And then while Section 10.7 proposes that Parliament must pass the Appropriation Bill with or without amendments within 4 months after the start of the financial year, which would essentially mean that by the end of July, then the Appropriation Bill would need to have been passed. And then, Chair, in terms of what needs to happen before, in the interim between the time that the budget is tabled, the beginning of the financial year, as well as the passing of the Appropriation Bill, it's important to also highlight that in the Public Finance Management Act, specifically in Section 29 of the Act, it makes provision for spending before the annual budget is passed. So it takes into account the first 4 months of the financial year before actually the Appropriation Bill is passed. And Section 29.1 notes that before an annual budget is passed, it provides for the withdrawal of funds before the passing of the budget. And specifically in Section 29.2, it notes that funds may be withdrawn from the National Revenue Fund, but those funds must be utilized only for services for which the funds were appropriated in the previous annual budget or in the adjustments budget. And then it sets out certain limitation with regards to that. For example, in section 29, subsection 1, it notes that during the first 4 months of that financial year, the funds may not exceed 45% of the total amount that was appropriated in the previous annual budget, and that during each of the following subsequent months, it must not exceed 10% of the total amount appropriated in the previous annual budget. So in aggregate, it must not exceed the total amount that is appropriated in the previous annual budget. So this is why then promulgation of the 2022 Appropriation Bill is important and necessary, because it will then allow for monthly expenditure above the transitional provisions that are provided for in Section 29 of the PFMA, as well as ensure that expenditure in accordance with the vote and program purposes can also take place. So moving on now to the actual appropriation bill that is under discussion today. Specifically, the bill has got two parts to it. The first part of the bill is basically talking to the different provisions to govern the utilization of the funds that are appropriated through the bill, while the second part of the bill is now the schedule that lists all the different allocations to each of the different boats. So when we look at the first part of the bill and the legislation provisions there, we just wanted to highlight some of the key ones. Section 3 of the bill notes that an amount that is marked as specifically and exclusively appropriated in the schedule may only be used for the purpose indicated unless the amount or purpose is amended by or in terms of an act of parliament. And this essentially means that there are allocations that through the allocation process that we earmark as specifically and exclusively appropriated, which means that any changes in year that take place against this fund can only happen with the approval of parliament through an act, and in the main that would be the adjustments appropriation bill. And then Section 4 provides that the Minister of Finance may, in writing, impose conditions on any amount allocated in the appropriation bill in order to promote transparency and accountability, as well as the effective management of the appropriation. And then section 4B also notes that the Minister of Finance may also stop the use of an amount in respect of which conditions imposed in terms of paragraph A are not met. So this is for instances where you find that a department does not meet the requirements of the conditions of the allocated funding, then the Minister of Finance is authorized in terms of the Appropriation Act to stop the use of those funds. And then in section 5.1 of the Act, so this section provides for all the in-year amendments related to the utilization of the funds. It notes that despite section 3 of the Act, so it basically notes that yes, even though some funds may be specifically and exclusively appropriated, or there may be conditions set in terms of the environment of funds, in terms of section 43.4 of the Public Finance, it gives authority once again to the Minister of Funds in the interest of service delivery, that he may approve that unspent funds in an amount allocated in the Appropriation Act may be used for compensation of employees, which is specifically and exclusively earmarked, but the Minister of Finance can approve that funds from compensation of employees be used within the same vote for transfers and subsidies, but specifically for the payment of severance or exit packages. It also gives the Minister of Finance the authority to consider a request to shift funds for goods and services so that they can be used elsewhere within the same vote for compensation of employees. So essentially increasing allocations for compensation of employees, which have, as I've indicated, is specifically and exclusively appropriated. And then it also provides for consideration of requests in regards to utilization of funds for transfers and subsidies for other purposes, as well as for payments for capital assets and payments for financial assets. And very important to highlight, honorable members, that in section 5.2, it limits these shifts. It says that the minister may not approve the use of unspent funds in terms of subsection 1C, D, or E for compensation of employees. So while the Minister of Finance can approve that funds for compensation of employees be utilized for severance packages, or that money be shifted from goods and services for compensation of employees, but then the Minister of Finance is not authorized to approve any shifts of funds for compensation of employees that are coming from either transfers and subsidies, payments for capital assets, or payments for financial assets. And then in the second part of the bill, as I've indicated, honorable members, this is where now all the different allocations for each of the votes are listed. And those allocations are broken down in terms of economic classification. That's how the allocations are listed there. And also important to highlight that for each and every vote, they will then, the budget would then be divided in terms of the different main divisions or programs, as we also call them, and that for each vote, there will then be a purpose of what that vote is intended to achieve, which is generally aligned with what the mandate of the specific department is. And then in order to be able to see these allocations that are earmarked as specifically and exclusively appropriated, we will then use an asterisk sign to indicate that, and just to give example of some of the items that are specifically and exclusively appropriated, that would be compensation of employees, as I've indicated earlier, as well as conditional grant. And then we also thought it's important to maybe make the link between the Appropriation Bill as well as the estimates of national expenditure, which is another publication that the Minister of Finance would table alongside the budget. So the estimates of national expenditure, or E&E, which is the abbreviation for that, is the explanatory memorandum of the Appropriation Bill. So that is where you will find all the detail that's related to how a specific department or vote intends to utilize its funding for that financial year. So it will have information on what the particular department aims to achieve over the MTF and why in terms of what are the strategic focus areas and how are those essentially funded within which programs, etc. It will also have some information on the previous spending track records of departments, because it shows the budget information over a 7-year period. It also has got a table there that shows the performance related information for departments as well as targets. But we always say there, it's not very detailed information, and we always refer people that are going through the E&E publication to also consider the E&E alongside departments' annual performance plans as well as strategic plans, because that's where the detailed information on performance is actually captured for departments. And then other information that's included in the E&E would be information related to infrastructure spending, as well as personnel spending. So essentially, as I've indicated, the estimate of national expenditure is the explanatory memorandum to the appropriation bill. So it's very important that when one looks at the appropriation bill, they also read that in conjunction with the estimates of national expenditure. And then now getting into the 2022 budget, we also thought, Chair, that we'll provide some of the key highlights from the budget that was tabled by the Minister of Finance in February. What is important to emphasize is that the 2022 budget fiscal consolidation remains a key theme of budget 2022. But for the first time, I think in a number of years, budget 2022 also provided some support to respond to the pandemic, which, as we know, has been with us for more than 2 years now. But then it also provided for support for job creation as well as social protection. And then in terms of other highlights of the budget, Chair, its GDP growth is expected to average about 1.8% over the next 3 years. And when we look at consolidated government spending, and consolidated government spending would look at every element of spending in government, not just what is included in the appropriation bill. So when we look at the consolidated government spending, it's going to amount to about 6.62 trillion over the next 3 years, with more than 50% of that actually going towards the social wage. And I will touch on the different elements of that very shortly. And when we look at main budget non-interest spending, budget 2022 increases that by a net of 282.3 billion over the medium-term expenditure framework period compared to the 2021 budget. And essentially this increase that we see in main budget non-interest spending is because of that additional support that was provided for the pandemic, as well as job creation and social protection. And it's very important to highlight that this was made possible because of higher than anticipated revenue collections over the past that are anticipated as well. But the intention is not to jeopardize the path to deficit reduction. So even though we've provided additional funding to some departments for these purposes, this will not jeopardize the path to this deficit reduction or the whole fiscal consolidation agenda that we currently have. So when we look at now the additional allocation, so when we look at the breakdown of this 282.3 billion, is the breakdown would be that 110.8 billion is allocated in 2022-23, 60 billion in 2023-24, and then 56.6 billion in 2024-25. And in the next slide, Chair, I will take you through who the money was allocated for. For this particular purpose. So with everything said, we are anticipating that a primary surplus will be achieved in 2023-24, and that the consolidated budget deficit will narrow to about 4.2% of GDP by 2024-25. Now, getting into the specific details of what the spending pressures that are funded in budget 22 are, we wanted to focus on the 2022-23 financial year, because this is essentially what is also included in the appropriation bill. So the main recipient of the additional funding would be the Department of Social Development, but specifically for social welfare interventions. So the department was allocated 44 billion, and this was specifically for the extension of the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant, or the 350 grant, as some people call it. So the department was allocated 44 billion in 2022-23 for that purpose. And then we also had allocations that were also aimed at supporting our continued response to the pandemic, specifically the Department of Health. At provincial level was allocated 7.4 billion in 2022-23. And then the other allocations were also allocated to the National Department for the medical interns and community service doctors, as well as the COVID-19 vaccination program as well. And then we also had an allocation of, in total, 16.8 billion that went to the education sector. 9 billion of that was for provincial education departments, and then about 7.8 billion of that went towards the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to support the continuation of bursaries for first-year students as well. And then we also had 10 billion that was allocated to the infrastructure investment and employment. 9 billion of that specifically went to support to a couple of departments to support their short-term job creation. And then about 1 billion was allocated for disaster recovery due to storms and floods. And then the summary of all the other allocations, we couldn't list them all, Chair, in the presentation because there's quite a long list of that. But the other allocations were about 25 billion, 20.5 billion of which was specifically for compensation of employees. And this was to provide for the carry-through implications of the 2021-22 wage agreement. So in total, in 2022-23, 110.8 billion in additional funding is allocated, and then the total over the MTF would be 227.4 billion. And then when we look at the social wage, Chair, specifically some of the main allocations that are supporting the social wage, about 276.1 billion is for social protection, and in the main that would be social grants. So about 248.3 billion in total is allocated for social grants. Then we also have an allocation of 266.7 billion that is for basic education, 188.8 billion that is for community development, specifically housing development, transport, water services, as well as local government, which includes the local government equitable share. We also have about 24.8 billion that's for employment programs, and then health has got a total allocation of about 234 billion for 2022-23. So in total, the social wage would then be 1.1 trillion for 2022-23. Very important to highlight, Chair, that this is when we look at the consolidated government spending and not spending that is only included in the appropriation bill. So this is why in total, 1.121 trillion would then be going towards the social wage. And then also in the 2022 budget, we also have some allocations that are provisional, which means that they are not assigned to allocated to any vote yet. And these allocations will then be confirmed once certain requirements have been met. So the departments that would then, or entities that are listed here, would have to meet certain requirements before this funding is actually allocated to them. And then we generally review that in the medium-term budget policy statement as part of that process, and that's when the funding would also be allocated. So when you look at some of the provisional allocations for 2022-23, it will be 4.2 billion for the infrastructure fund, and then 1.3 billion for the COVID-19 vaccination program. We're also just showing previously other allocations that would have been provisional or over the medium term may have been, for example, for ESCOM as well as the SASA and so forth. But in the main for 2022-23, the only provisional allocations are for the infrastructure funds as well as for the COVID-19 vaccination program. And then, Chair, to also break down the allocation that I referred to earlier for the employment in intervention. In the main, you had about, I think, 7 departments that received an allocation. It's very important to also indicate that even though the flow of funds went to some of these departments, it does not necessarily mean that it is the departments themselves that are running the program, but it may be either their entities, etc., that have to implement certain elements related to this employment creation program. So, for example, about 6.2 billion in 2022-23 was allocated to the National Treasury, but it's specifically for the provincial equitable share. So this is funds that are allocated to the National Treasury, but the provincial equitable share, and the funds will then flow to the basic education sector because that's where the job creation is going to take place. So they got about 6.2 billion of the total allocation of 9 billion. So they received the highest allocation. And then other allocations were also, for example, to the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture for their creative sector support program, as well as, for example, to the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition for the Social Employment Fund, which is where the program that is going to be creating the jobs. And then there were also allocations that went to different metropolitan municipalities as well in terms of the placemaking in townships and informal settlements and other inner city initiatives there. So in total, Chair, 9 billion was allocated for the presidential employment intervention, and in total we anticipate that these particular programs and initiatives will create about 513,000 jobs in short-term jobs in 2022-23. Okay, then I will now move to the content of the 2022 Appropriation Bill, starting off with just a summary, high-level summary of what is allocated in the bill. In total, we have about 1 trillion that is allocated for 2022-23 in the Appropriation Bill. Of that, about 260.9 or 261 billion is for current payments, so compensation of employees, goods and services, and interest and rent on land, even though it's not shown here. And then there would also be about 755 billion that goes to towards transfers and subsidies. And then we also have 15.5 billion for payments for capital assets and 25.6 billion for payments for financial assets. So, Chair, in the next few slides, I will then break down these allocations so that honorable members can get a sense of how this money was allocated in the bill for each of the different votes. So starting off with the overall allocations to departments, and I say in brackets, excluding direct charges, just to show that there are also direct charges that may be included in the votes of some of these departments when you look at the estimates of national expenditure, for example, but in the appropriation bill, as we would know, direct charges are not shown there. So these are the allocations to these departments, excluding those direct charges. And in the main, Chair, about 61% of the total budget is appropriated to about 5 departments, being the Department of Cooperative Governance, the Department of Higher Education and Training, the Department of Social Development, the Department of Police, as well as the Department of Transport. So when we look at the overall allocations, about 61% of the total budget goes towards these departments. And it's not because they are being favored for any reason, but is looking at the different mandates and the activities that these departments specifically are required to meet for government. So the allocations that are going towards this department will mainly provide for your free basic services, your post-school education and training, which is mainly the Department of Higher Education and Training. And then from a social development point of view, the allocation will mainly go towards social grants. And then for the police, it is for crime prevention and prevention, while for transport is for the maintenance of the road transport network, among other things. So we just thought we should also just maybe highlight so that members can see how much went towards these departments, but also show what the allocations to other departments were. So in each of the different slides that are going to follow now, Chair, we're just going to just circle in red where the main allocations were, or where the bulk of the funding went towards. And in this particular slide, as you can see, about 111 billion was to the Department of Cooperative Governance, 109.5 billion to higher education and training, and about 257 billion went towards social development. And then if we look at this slide, we show that about 100.7 billion of the total allocation of 1.057 trillion was allocated to the police, and then about 69 billion went to transport. But you can also see the allocations to all the other different departments, which essentially make up the total allocation of 1 trillion for 2022-23. And then, Chair, now moving into the detail per economic classification. So under current payments, as I've indicated, one of the items there is compensation of employees. So when we look at the total compensation of employees allocations, we see that once again, some departments are more labor intensive than others. So those that are more labor intensive would then receive the bulk of the allocations for compensation of employees. And in this particular slide, the Department of Higher Education and Training will receive about 10.8 billion of the overall total allocations for compensation of employees. In total, the allocation for compensation of employees for national departments would then amount to 179 billion in 2022-23. And then the highest allocations are to the labor-intensive departments, which include the Department of Higher Education and Training, the police, defense, justice, and correctional services. So in the main departments within the safety and security cluster, because they are generally labor intensive. Just to also highlight, Chair, the allocation for the Department of Education, Higher Education and Training provides for, amongst others, the salaries of over 16,000 TVET and over 9,000 CET lecturers in these institutions of higher learning and education. And then when we look at the slide here, we see all the allocations for departments, and including those that for labor intensive departments in the peace and security cluster, your police, your defense, your correctional services, and justice and constitutional development. And then the total there, as I've indicated, for compensation of employees in 2022-23 would then be 179 billion. And then moving to goods and services, which is also under current payments, the budgets for goods and services generally provide for the administrative or operational expenses for departments, and this would range anything from being able to provide for their office accommodation, being able to provide for the utility expenses associated with that, and also being able to provide for the tools of trade of departments to be able to execute their mandate and responsibilities. So when we look at the goods and services budget, I have a bit of a noise coming through, Chair.
Sorry, can we please mute? Hello, Chaso, can you please mute? Chaso, can you please mute? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I I don't know who's having a number of Nchas or Caso. Can you please phone him or her and request humbly to that, can they mute? There's only one person who's talking. All of us are muted. And that would be Ms. Hadebe. Ms. Hadebe, please continue. Please, everybody who's on the platform, unless he or she's talking, must be muted. Otherwise, we are disrupted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you so much, Chair. So as I was saying, when we look at the breakdown of the allocations for our goods and services, we once again are highlighting some of the areas where the bulk of the funds will be going towards. For example, for cooperative governance, about 4.8 billion of their total budget is allocated for goods and services. And that budget will also provide for the Community Works program, which is delivered through the Department of Cooperative Governance. And then the Health Department, about 4 billion of their total budget is allocated for goods and services. And this budget would provide for medicine and medical supplies, contractors, as well as operating leases, amongst other operational expenses of the department as well. And then we have about 2.2 billion that's allocated to the Department of Basic Education. And one of the main spending drivers under goods and services for basic education would be the printing and distribution of workbooks for grade R to grade 9 learners. And then the Department of International Relations and Corporations is allocated about 2.5 billion for goods and services, and that mainly provides for their travel. As we know, in this particular department, travel is one of the key spending drivers because of the nature of their mandate, but then it also provides for operating leases as well as operating payments. And then in the case of Home Affairs, the 2.9 billion that is allocated for goods and services would mainly be for computer services, operating leases, as well as property payments. And then when we look at other departments, once again, we see some departments in safety and security that are highlighted here. So because of the size of their budget, the goods and services budget also needs to be able to provide for the operational expenses for these particular departments. So for the departments in peace and security, for example, the cost drivers under goods and services would include office accommodation. As we know, a department like defense would have military bases, whilst department like police or correctional services, they would have police stations and correctional services facilities in different parts of the country. So office accommodation or operating leases would be one of the key cost drivers under goods and services for these departments. And then we also have other departments like the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform, and Rural Development that will receive about 3.8 billion as part of the goods and services department, and that would be for provision of administrative support in that department, while the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment is allocated 4.7 billion under goods and services, and that's mainly for agency and support and outsourced services. And Chair, if you require more details on what's underlying some of these items, the different function leaders within the National Treasury can be able to provide that detail as part of the question and answer session. And then when we look at transfers and subsidies allocations by vote, the main transfers or the departments that receive the biggest allocations for transfers and subsidies would be cooperative governance, National Treasury, basic education, higher education and training, health, and social development. And for cooperative governance, Chair, that's mainly the local government equitable share as well as the municipal infrastructure grant. For health, the transfers and subsidies budget mainly provides for transfers to the entities as well as the human resources and training grant. For the National Treasury, as we know, it's got a number of entities. So the transfers and subsidies budget mainly goes for transferring the budget for operational expenses of the various entities that the National Treasury has, and SARS is one of those. And then for basic education, the allocation mainly provides for the infrastructure grant and school nutrition program, whilst for higher education and training, it provides for subsidies and for universities, as well as the National Student Financial Aid Scheme as well. And then for social development, which receives the bulk, as you can see, 256.1 billion, that would be for a social grant. And then again, here we'll list some of the allocations for other departments, highlighting the Department of Transport, which has got a budget of 67.6 billion for transfers and subsidies, and that's mainly for transfers to SANRAL, as well as PRASA, and then also for various grants that are administered by the department, such as your provincial roads maintenance grant, public transport operations, as well as the public transport network operations grant as well. And then as we move towards wrapping up the allocations per economic classification, the next one would be the payments for capital assets. So this is in the main providing for all the infrastructure related elements of spending in departments. And the departments that have got the highest allocations for payments for capital assets would be basic education and health, as we indicate on the slide. And for basic education, Chair, that budget would mainly provide for the school infrastructure backlogs grant, which is an indirect grant that is included in the Division of Revenue Act as part of Schedule 6A. And then for health, it's the construction maintenance, upgrading and rehabilitation of new and existing health infrastructure. So that is that allocation of 1.4 billion. And then if we look at other departments, we see that the police will receive about 3.6 billion in the budget for payments for capital assets, and that's mainly to provide for the construction and upgrading of police stations, as well as machinery and equipment. Again, that is also because of the nature of the activities that are being performed by the police. And then for water and sanitation, they've got about 4.4 billion, and that is mainly for the bulk regional infrastructure and water services infrastructure grants. These are also grants that are designated for special programs in Schedule 6B of the Division of Revenue Act. So in total, Chair, we've got about 15.5 billion that is allocated for payments for capital asset. And then the last economic classification item would be payments for financial assets. In total, we've got about 25.6 billion that's allocated for that. 1.9 billion is the allocation that is allocated under the National Treasury vote, and that is specifically to provide for the recapitalization of different institutions such as the Land Bank, the World Bank, African Development Bank, as well as the African Development Fund. And then whilst 23.6 billion is allocated to the Department of Public Enterprises, but specifically for transfer to ESCOM as part of that continued process of helping them deal with, amongst others, their interest and other debt-related issues. In summary, Chair, the cost pressures that are funded in the budget or in the 2022 Appropriation Bill through a combination of reallocations, reprioritization, and additional funding, as I've indicated. So some of the cost pressures were not funded by adding onto the baseline of departments, but they were funded through reprioritization of the existing budget within a particular department, and priority was given to those interventions that are associated with the impact of COVID-19, as well as to meet urgent service delivery needs. And I'm just summarizing once again some of the largest allocation. The bulk of the funding that was allocated in 2022-23 went towards the Department of Social Development to extend the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant for 12 months. Then we also had allocations that went to health, education, and then 9 billion for the presidential employment intervention for the creation of more than 500,000 or 514,000 short-term jobs in 2022-23. Again, in summarizing the presentation, about 71% of the total budget is allocated for transfers and subsidies, and that's mainly for social grants or conditional grants, transfers to public entities, as well as for university subsidies and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. And then the largest share of compensation of employees allocations went towards the labor-intensive departments, such as those in the peace and security function group. Very important to highlight here is that we have not made any provision for increases in compensation of employees' expenditure above the carry-through implications of the wage agreement that was signed in the 2021-22 financial year. So departments are still required to continue adhering to their compensation of employee ceiling, and if needed, they must also reduce their personnel numbers to make sure that they are within the available budget. Payments for capital assets constitute about 1.5% of the total budget, and it's mainly for your indirect grants. And overall, Chair, we're saying that any permanent new spending commitment. So even though we have provided funding, to support social protection as an example of job creation, but it's very important that any permanent new spending commitments, such as your additional social protection. So if we go beyond the 12 months, they have to be fully financed through other measures, such as your tax measures or spending cuts to prevent the deterioration of fiscal balance. So it's very important that we find a sustainable funding model for these. And then, Chair, just quickly to then summarize the second adjustments appropriation bill that was enacted in 2022, but it's for the 2021 financial year. Again, just a brief background to remind us of the legislative provision that gives rise to the adjustments appropriation bill. And just to maybe highlight on the slide, we start off now with the appropriation bill, which eventually becomes an appropriation act. And then thereafter, it's the Adjustments Appropriation Act. And then it may also happen that in addition to the Adjustments Appropriation Act, we may also need to issue other adjustments to the budget post the adjustments budget process, which generally happens in October of every year. So those further adjustments, if they are required to authorize expenditure that is approved in terms of Section 6 of the Appropriation Act and Section 16 of the Public Finance Management Act. So the Section 3A of the special of the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill notes that despite the effective date of this act, the appropriation of money for expenditure in terms of Section 6 of the Appropriation Act must be regarded as an appropriation and expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year. So even though we had it enacted in 2022, but the expenditure will be regarded as expenditure for the 2021-22 financial year. And then in terms of Section 16 of the Public Finance Management Act, it must be regarded as an appropriation for the 2021-22 and 2022-23 financial years, and the expenditure must be recorded in the financial year in which any portion of the appropriation is spent. So if part of it is spent in 2021-22, it must be allocated in that financial year. And then if another part is allocated in 2022-23, it must be recorded in that particular financial year. Just to show, Chair, so in the second appropriation bill, we had two allocations, and it was to the National Treasury as well as to the Department of Health. And I will just briefly indicate what that funding was allocated for. So about 500 million went to the National Department of Health to pay for COVID-19 vaccines and related logistics. And those funds were allocated in terms of Section 61B of the 2021 Appropriation Act. And it's very important to highlight, Chair, that they are subject to conditions, which is that A, there must be monthly reports on expenditure that are also provided, as well as the availability of supply and the delivery schedule, since this is related to COVID-19 vaccines and related logistics, and also National Treasury approval for additional vaccine purchases must also be obtained before they can be made. So if we look at the overall allocation share to health in 2022-23, they have about 5.3 billion, but actually in 2021-22 they've got 8.8 billion in total, and these are allocations that went towards the COVID-19 vaccination program. So the 500 million was in addition to funding that was already provided in 2021-22. So in total, when we consider the period 2020-21 to 2022-23, in total, we have allocated about 15.3 billion towards the COVID-19 vaccination rollout. And this table basically shows the different elements related to this. For example, some of the funding went towards communication campaigns, others went towards the service delivery related costs of the vaccination program. And then the bulk of the funding was actually for the procurement of the actual vaccine, as well as the distribution, as well as the other information systems that are needed to implement that. And then finally, Chair, some funding went towards SASRIA. As we know, the July 2021 unrest that happened last year resulted in an increase in the magnitude of insurance claims that were received by this entity, and this resulted in SASRIA being technically insolvent and unable to settle claims because the magnitude of the claims that they received exceeded what was available in their budget, essentially, and as a result, they were not able to maintain a minimum solvency ratio of 100%, which is required by the Prudential Authority in the Reserve Bank. So based on the claims that had been received from or emanating from the July 2021 civil unrest, SASRIA then needed to settle about claims amounting to about 32 billion. And because they did not have enough funding, they needed an equity injection of about 22 billion. But specifically in the second special appropriation act, about 3.9 billion was provided, and then 7.1 billion was then provided through Section 16.1 of the Public Finance Management Act, and then about 11 billion through Section 6.1b of the Appropriation Act 2021. So in total, it's about 18 billion in total that was allocated, 18.1 billion if we include the 3.9 billion. And this was to enable SASRIA to settle all the valid claims, because not all the claims that it receives are actually valid, but this should be able to provide, to enable them to provide all the claims that are evaluated and deemed to be valid. And then following the receipt of this government support, because of the pressures that I've indicated earlier, the fact that SASRIA was technically insolvent, but because of the receipt of additional government support, the external auditors were able to confirm and sign off on the annual financial statements for the entity for the 2021 financial year, and they were satisfied that SASRIA is a going concern because they've received this additional financial support from government. And then SASRIA also confirmed that its SCR will recover to a projected 120% by June 2020. So even though the Prudential Authority requires 100%, they confirm that they can actually reach about 120% by June 2022. But that is provided that the entity manages to achieve a 90% claim payout rate by then. And then the entity also projects to achieve a solvency ratio of about 160%, 166% as at the end of March 2023. And that's if all these initiatives that I've highlighted actually get effectively implemented. So Chair, in summary, that would be the summary of the second adjustments appropriation bill, as well as the 2022 appropriation bill. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tere. Dr. Mampo, any additions? Can you proceed?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the only addition I have for now is just to explain the regulations for the social relief of distress grant as we were talking last week. Can I do that, Chair, or do you think we should take questions and then I can deal with it through the questions?
No, you can do it now, Dr. Mampo.
All right, thank you, Chairperson. So basically, what I'm trying to explain is how we did the regulations. So in the past, Chairperson, the main focus was looking at people who are unemployed, and that was the prerequisite for you to get the funding. Now, there were people who were not included, and they were appealing. So those people that appealed the decision by SASSA, then we looked at the 596, which is the poverty line. So what we are doing now, Chairperson, is that we are looking at doing these verifications for everybody, and we finally got the concurrence to work with the banks to do the verification. So the 350 is for everybody, unlike in the past where the focus was only on the people who were appealing, and that number was around one odd million. So I had a discussion with the Department of Social Development, and they have been talking to COSATU on this. But basically what they will be doing is that through these verification processes and looking at the budget that exists, they will then be looking on a monthly basis at these threshold of 350, and if the verification are excluding people who should not be receiving the grant and they have sufficient money in the budget, then they will reconsider the 350. But they have been doing the presentations, Chairperson, in NETLEC, and I think if the committee wants further details on this, they can definitely come into the presentation. I thought I should give you just the feedback, Chairperson, that the 350 is a new thing and we're looking at it for everybody, while in the past there was no amount for people. It was just a person who's unemployed, and then the 596 was for people who are appealing, not for everybody. So we're trying to include as many people as we can. That's why we're starting at the grant value, which is the 350. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Mampo and Ms. Hadebe for the presentation on both of the bills. All members, you know how we do it. Can we start? Let me start by getting indications of the oral members who would like to have questions or comments on the bills that have been presented. Okay.
Sarupin.
It's Honorable Peters, Honorable Sarupen.
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa.
Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana. Honorable members. Honorable members, any other honorable member would like to come in? I've got Honorable Peters, I've got Honorable Sarupen, I've got Honorable Matafa, Honorable Mlenzana. Any other honorable member before I close? Kaiso. Honorable Kaiso. Is that it? Any other person? Honorable members? Okay. And other honorable members are also having some challenges as far as connectivity is concerned. If they come back to the platform, please indicate, honorable members, if you would like to have a question or a comment on the presentations by Ms. Hadebe and Dr. Mampo. Thank you. Honorable Peters, can you start?
Thank you, Chairperson. Mine is just a very short question, probably related to the last parts of. Oh, let me start by thanking National Treasury, Dr. Mampo and Mekhatebe for the presentations. And also to indicate, Chairperson, that my questions are going to be very short. My one question is related, and I would think that, Chairperson, you preempted my question by asking Dr. Mampo to speak to that 350 issue, the social relief of distress. My question, Dr. Mampo, is why is it that National Treasury is not supporting SASSA and the Department of Social Development on a public education or awareness campaign with regards to this particular issue? And to avoid a situation, Chairperson, where National Treasury becomes reactive to whatever is put in the public domain with regard to a matter as important as this one. I'm sure Dr. Mampo would be aware that many people really appreciate this 350 to an extent that our people even made a song about it. Ukuthi uRamaphosa uyabathanda amahlalela ubanikeze 350. And for me, it means that the unsavoriness that existed last week was primarily because of lack of information and not understanding what exactly is going to happen with regard to this 350 when the president spoke to it, as well as the Minister of Finance in his budget. So I still believe that despite what Dr. Mampo said today, there needs to be a public education program that would help the public to understand what the approach is, because I think it is a matter of approach, not necessarily whether people will get it or not get it. My second question, Chairperson, goes to the to Mekhatebe with regard to the issue SASRIA. Now I'm still a bit confused. Why should SASRIA's shortfall be covered by the National Revenue Fund? Are the businesses that are beneficiaries from this or make claims against, or any beneficiary that makes claim against SASRIA not making contributions? And they have been making contributions for many years. And there was a stage where we were told that SASRIA is financially sustainable. And I just want to find out whether when SASRIA is financially sustainable or cash flushed, for a lack of a better word, do they pay dividends or profits to the states, to the state? And is National Treasury able to monitor businesses that claimed compensation from SASRIA but did not return to service after the July this thing? That means they closed shop. They just took made their claims and then closed shop, not to return to service again. And what about the workers? Is their losses not included in the claims that these businesses would have submitted to SASRIA? I know that we will talk about the intervention of the Department of Labor through the, what is it called? Is it STER or whatever it's called, when with the intervention that was made at the time of the beginning of COVID. I just forgot that acronym, but it is through the unemployment insurance scheme. So I think it is important that we get to know what then happens to those workers. Do they now just left to be an addition to the number of people who are unemployed and their issues have not been addressed? Thank you, Chair. But otherwise, I really appreciate the presentation because it helps us with engagements going forward with the Appropriations Bill.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Honorable Sarupeni, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, most of my questions relate to the main Appropriations Bill and not the Special Appropriations Bill. So I'm just going to fire them off. Firstly, how does the new Appropriations Bill for this financial year reflect a previous commitment to zero-based budgeting? The Treasury and the previous Finance Minister had made a commitment in Parliament to zero-based budgeting, and it does not appear that that's come to fruition, and the new finance minister has not walked it back. I mean, I think, Chair, considering that no finance minister has actually appeared before this committee since the start of this term, it would be great if we could get the finance minister as well to come and brief us on his vision and how he intends on running the ministry going forward, considering that this committee is the custodian of his legislation. Then, Chair, my second question is with regards to long-standing programs run by various government departments that are funded. Often programs are initiated and then they're financed every year in the Appropriations Bill. And we as the committee go into, and we'll summon a handful of departments and ask them about the efficiency of some of the programs that might have been initiated in 98 and 99 or 2000 that are still funded. But I'd like to know if there's any assessment by Treasury on whether these long-standing programs are getting value for money, and if such programs are not, and plans are not duplicating other departments' functions. And in this regard, Chair, I'd like to understand how Treasury ends up agreeing to funding duplication of programs. I'll give you an example, Chair. There's programs in National Treasury to support municipalities in their financing and budgeting, but there are also the same programs being run by COGTA. And then the same programs around support for budgeting is being run by provincial government departments, both provincial COGTAs and provincial treasuries. So what we have in this case is 4 programs trying to achieve the same outcome, which is to make sure that municipalities budget efficiently and manage their cash flow and finances efficiently. And I'd like to know how it ends up that these things get funded in appropriation bills. Then, Chair, my fourth question is, how is National Treasury going to be dealing with the duplication of programs that we see across national departments, provincial departments, and municipalities, which is actually financially inefficient? And then my last question, Chair, relates to containing the public sector wage bill in the new financial year. What steps are being taken to curtail the massive costs of 30,000 millionaire managers in the public service? We must be clear, it's not our teachers, our doctors, and our nurses that are actually the drain. It is, in fact, those numbers have been capped and aren't growing in relation to population size. But we've got a class of millionaire managers who are getting 7, 8, 9% increases, the same as the rest of the public service, but are earning a lot more than members of parliament, more than the president, et cetera, and we need to understand what steps are being taken to curtail a growth in expenditure there. Because giving a 5 or 6% increase to a teacher earning 220,000 Rand a year is a lot less than giving a 5 or 6% increase to a senior manager earning more than R1 million a year. Thanks very much, Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupen. Honorable Matafa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Like Honorable Peters, let me thank the presenters for the presentation made. Chair, I have only 2 short questions, and one revolves around the issue of job creation. One appreciates the fact that indeed this budget is responsive to the challenges that are faced by ordinary South Africans, considering that up to 50% of the appropriations bill is earmarked for social expenditure. However, in the presentation, it is noted correctly that the presidential employment initiatives in the main create short-term employment opportunities. Now, the question that I have there is that since the country is battling with a high youth unemployment, what other areas of the budget can be considered to be responsive to this challenge? And second to that, Chair, I'm one of those that agree with the President that the private sector should lead the effort of job creation. From the Treasury's point, what issues are hindering the private sector to actually get their hands dirty to ensure that the issue of job creation is eradicated once and for all? Because where I'm sitting, I may be wrong. I have a view that the private sector is also moving very slow, and they do not appreciate the urgency that the country is facing as far as the issue of job creation is concerned. The last one, Chair, it's a operational one, and that I think the budget going forward can assist, particularly as we speak to the issue of capital asset transfers. Memorandum speaks about bulk water infrastructure projects that will be identified, and a certain allocation is made to ensure that this particular projects are completed. My question is, how will these beneficiaries be identified so that they are classified as special projects? If they have been, can I check also if Tshwane is involved? Two areas of particular interest. The one issue which has become a human rights issue, where the Human Rights Commission has also made a pronouncement, is the issue of Hammaskral wastewater treatment plant. I'm interested to find out how would a plant of this nature and a catastrophe of our residents consuming contaminated water be classified as a special project in order to qualify for this particular capital transfer. The last one on the same issue of capital assets transfer dealing with water is the issue of Henops River, which its mouth is located in Ekurhuleni. But as it flows into the city of Tshwane, goes through Centurion and passes through the lake and the mall. Now, the contamination of the lake has caused business flight to a point that people have lost their jobs. How then do we ensure that this issue also gets priority in terms of budget allocation and consideration by this particular capital transfers? Because between the city of Tshwane and Ekurhuleni, there is issues of pushing the bag to say, no, but this is not my responsibility, it's on your area. And then Tshwane says, no, but Ekurhuleni, this mouth of this river is in your area. You are supposed to service upstream so that you are not affected downstream. I just wanted to pose just those two questions, Chair, but the Appropriations Bill is very much welcome, as I indicated earlier. In my view, it is very responsive to the current challenges that the country faces. Thank you very much, Chair.
Honorable Matafa, thank you. Honorable Lenzana, please come in.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning. Let me just show my face, Chair, just to greet, long time no see. I was held up, by this serious and heavy flu. But at least now I'm getting there. It's just now, if you can notice, the voice is still hoarse, but I'm getting fine. Let me switch off this video, Chair, if you allow me.
Please proceed.
Let me follow suit in terms of welcoming the presentation, well crafted amid the challenges that Treasury has at this time. I hope that Dr. Mampo, you would come to us for an appeal for another special appropriations, I guess, following the floods in KZN and Eastern Cape. That has been severe, and I'm sure would definitely need our specific relook into what we would have approved, Chairperson. It has to be, given a separate, look aside these other challenges that have been raised. Chairperson, my first generic question to Dr. Mampo and the team would be, are they implementing SCOA's resolutions to the latter? If yes, are they able to account to us item per item, not necessarily in this meeting? I'm raising this, Chair, because there would be issues which you would raise as SCOA to Treasury for a particular look and implementation. But down the line during implementation, you would be shocked to learn that, Ahman, it is not what we decided upon. But now Treasury is implementing something totally different to what we resolved. I am glossing over this deliberately, Chairperson. I don't want to be specific because I don't want to spark fire. Secondly, Chair, would be on the presidential implementation intervention, on the employment intervention, that presidential employment intervention. Do we have, Dr. Mampo, some kind of monitoring tools, particularly monitoring cash flow? When I'm saying, Chairperson, monitoring cash flows, is cash flowing as per the designed time frame? Is cash flowing as per the need identified? Is there no disjuncture? Is there no a loophole which creates a situation that we budget and ultimately we don't realize because of whatever delays in the flow of things towards implementation? Chairperson, you know, I have a question here. I think I once asked. I welcome this budget, Chairperson, because if you look at it, the bulk of it would go towards social services. But now, Chair, my question is to Dr. Mampo and Tim. I relate this to, for instance, you are talking COVID, you are talking the July occurrences, and now the floods. How do you try to balance creation of a welfare state versus the advancement of a developmental state through economic recovery and transformation? My theme, Chairperson, for today would be around job creation, because if you notice, the same question that I'm raising now goes back to finding a way of reducing the unemployment statistics that we have in the country. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mlenzana. Welcome back. You sound very healthy. And I hear the voice. Other people are saying that's the voice that they want. So keep it that way.
Thanks,
can hear.
Thank you so much.
We can hear loud and clear, and welcome back. And I think the same applies to Honorable Sarupen. He was also not feeling well at some stage, but I can hear that he's quite healthy now. Can I allow Honorable Kaiso to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, Honorable Chair and members. I want to also report myself back from short illness, and I'm up on my feet. Thanks very much for the support. I'm here, Chair. Let me also take the cue on what my colleagues have said in as far as welcoming the presentation by Treasury. In fact, it was well, presented and illustrated so that we're able to follow what is there in as far as the bill is concerned. And thank you very much, Dr. Mampo and your team. I want to share, I have three issues to raise or questions to ask, but let me start here. Yes, the budget takes care of the social wage to a larger extent, covering the situation our people find themselves, especially the poor. So at least such allocation will be able to mitigate around the issue of poverty, yes. But then I want to come back to a situation where Honorable Mlenzana has raised as well, because I'm asking myself, how is Treasury going to balance this? Whereas the growth of there is a growth of a a social wage which is fine to intervene in this current situation. But I think there has to be more that Treasury has to look around, to shop around in as far as attending to the assisting in as far as the issue of unemployment is concerned. Not only focusing on one area where there's only expansion on the social wage, but at the same time there is an expansion of unemployment. So there has to be a way that how to arrest that situation. I thought maybe Treasury would also, besides not only relying on presidential youth employment initiative that creates jobs for so, but then I wish there could be some sort of a template that seek then to say, now in as far as job creation and and unemployment is concerned, particularly as Treasury, we thought we must bring these things together, which should then talk to the issue of also economic recovery and job creation. So specifically, yes, we understand that there will be some pieces of jobs there and there, but then there has to be at least a strategy that Treasury present from time to time from us to say, no, look, we have finally come up with this mechanism or this way in order to intervene in as far as the job unemployment is concerned and job creation is concerned. I think one would be very much happy if that could be, a direction that at the end of the day, the Treasury would think of about. Secondly, my question is on health, Honorable Chair. The issue of state pharmaceutical company. Yes, there's a good move in as far as looking at the budget of health, but then looking at the developments imposed by COVID-19, the experience, we thought that maybe unless I missed something there in the presentation, but then I think the issue of state pharmaceutical companies is very much crucial in as far as health is concerned, because we would understand that we then rely on the imports of medicine from other foreign companies, whereas we have a very nice resolution to implement in as far as state pharmaceutical company is. So maybe an update around that in as far as budgeting is concerned to realize this objective of fully flushed state pharmaceutical companies. Is there fund that has been been put up so that now this matter is being realized now finally, because it has long been there? And then secondly is on the CCMA. This matter has become disruptive in as far as production is concerned, because CCMA, I mean, it is an outcry there at the public level in as far as funding of CCMA is concerned. There has to be something that is being made, because CCMA seems to have been stripped to the bone in as far as budgeting is concerned. So I think there has to be a way that we shouldn't allow disruption of production level because of this important, very important, statutory institution. So there has to be something that is being put, so that CCMA can be nicely budgeted for, so that it can perform its function in as far as intervention at the workplace level, so that the production levels are not disruptive. Because in the absence of such, that's where you get a number of disruptions at the workplace levels, because there is no anybody who's intervening between the employer and the employee because of budget problems, challenges. Now, I want to know from the Mehatebe around the issue that you said that if departments are not able to meet their financial commitments, they have to look forward to reduce personnel numbers to meet their financial commitments. I think this matter is a sensitive matter that actually shouldn't come here to say reduction of personnel numbers, because it will raise a lot of dust. It belongs somewhere. So I'm hopeful that Treasury is very careful around this matter, because it may cause a lot of problem tomorrow. So I want to understand in which context are you referring to this? Maybe I may have put the horse before the cart, but that's my understanding. So thank you very much.
Honorable Kaiso, thank you. Can I check with the oral members? Honorable Peters, anything that you'd like to add?
Chair, my hand is up, please. Honorable Hlangweni.
Hi, Honorable Ntlangwini. Sorry, I didn't, I never looked at the hands. Good morning and you're welcome. Please raise your issues.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I was cut out the time that you were taking the hands, the last part of the presentation. No, but nevertheless, Chair, I have two issues to raise. One is on the SASRIA issue, and pertaining to the funding that is going towards SASRIA. Why are we, or was any input or research done to check these monies that are going to SASRIA, which companies will benefit from the funding that are going to SASRIA? Because I have a problem that now we are giving of putting in money as National Treasury to an institution that are supposed to have an insurance function in terms of these businesses. So when we are having a next crisis, like the flooding, SASRIA is going to come back to National Treasury and request for more funding. Are they not supposed to be self-sufficient to ensure that these businesses are getting their value for money or getting back the returns if they were to pay a certain levy to SASRIA? Because I don't know, am I making sense, Chair? But I just feel we might be giving an institution imali that was supposed to go to other functions in the likes of Denel or in the likes of SAA, but we are giving it to an institution that must be self-sufficient and self-sustaining, because SASRIA is having a function of a type of insurance. So tomorrow for the flooding, they will also come and ask National Treasury for money. So I'd like to know the list of businesses that will benefit from the funding that National Treasury will give to SASRIA. Or is National Treasury just having an unlimited card and just giving monies to SASRIA and not knowing how and where these monies will be used? The second one, Chair, it's on the one that I think Mem Khadebe was speaking to. It's the problem that I'm picking up. National Treasury don't have or is not proactive in ensuring that we don't have departments that are doing rentals. Because now you are giving money as National Treasury and not playing a proactive role to ensuring that as a Department of Defense, as a Department of Police, that your rental structure within your budget doesn't exceed other components of the budget. Like, for instance, what we have heard in Defense Chair, that Our soldiers doesn't even have uniform. Our soldiers doesn't have even ammunition. So if South Africa were to go into a war, we are having soldiers that won't be able to know how to use a firearm. And that is a joke. But we are giving monies that is so high up on rentals, and there is land that the department are having as a defense force, and I'm using them as an example. Is National Treasury doing an extensive research to ensure that the rentals budgets in this department are a bit cut down, and we're working towards more a way of having the departments owning their own buildings? I mean, you are government. There's no situation that is going to change. Tomorrow that there won't be a Department of Police. Tomorrow there won't be a Department of Defense. We must stop running the departments like a business. It's a public servants institution, and it must be dealt like that. This thing of this arrangement of rentals must come to a full stop, and National Treasury must play a leading role and be at the forefront, because they are the custodian of the country's money, to see that we are stopping this issue that high rentals are being paid to all of these departments or to the private sector. That in fact, all of these buildings, or majority of them, are white owned. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ntlangwini. Can I check with honorable members? Honorable Peters, do you have any additional question?
Yes, Chair.
Please come in.
Chairperson, this camera makes people dance around. I don't know what is happening. So I think I must just switch it off. I mean, I could see myself dancing when I know that I'm not dancing. Chair. Chairperson, my last question to National Treasury is with regard to the SANRAL's non-toll budget. My question is it not possible that a National Treasury, rather than a SANRAL not being able at times to spend its non-toll budget or underspending in its non-toll budget, and the executing authority not being advised to divert, or the accounting officer not being advised to divert some of that money to other areas where SANRAL services is needed? I'll make an example, Chairperson, and I know that you know the example that I'm going to raise. I feel like a broken record with regard to this particular matter. I believe that the non-toll budget of SANRAL could be used to assist the many provinces who have got very bad roads condition. If you look at the N12 that is going through Wolmaranstad, if you look at the R31, Wolmaranstad is in Northwest, and it's a major network connection between Gauteng and Cape Town. Many of the buses, many of the trucks pass through the Wolmaranstad. That there's no longer a road in Wolmaranstad. So I think it is important that a National Treasury could be the conscience of departments like the province of Northwest and the Department of Transport, to say, you've got capacity with regard to roads building and technology that is related to roads in SANRAL. Why don't you utilize this money in repairing this road that is a major economic road? The other one is the R31 in the Northern Cape. Comrade Chairperson, I would advise you one day when you visit the Northern Cape again, like you love visiting the Northern Cape, go and see the R31. It is now a lake that has developed there, a lake from a water treatment plant that has malfunctioned over the years, a road that is the R31 that is supporting the mines that come from your Kathu, your Postmansberg, they pass through Kimberley, go through the ports in KZN. So I think it is important, Chairperson. The road has now been diverted. The community of Bartley West, that is 35 kilos from Kimberley, have now to divert to the N12. The road has been extended with an additional 100 kilometers because that thing is a lake that goes on both sides. That water, Chairperson, used to be treated water sold to mines and to farmers. The Solplaiki municipality doesn't seem to have the capacity to be able to deal with that water treatment plant. So I am advising, I know there's one of the DDGs from National Treasury who once said they can't advise municipalities because municipalities have got this notion that they earn more than them. So who are they to come and tell them how to do their work? If they don't know how to do their work and yet take the package home, they should just check drawers then. Because it would mean that we've got people who knows that this water is going to be a problem for the community, but they are not doing anything about it. So I'm asking Treasury that rather than later on coming to us to request deviations for the non-toll, can't Treasury and the departments, I know the departments go to Treasury with their proposals for budgets, but Treasury can then be able to direct them and say water and sanitation, speak to Northern Cape Province, speak to Northwest Province, and transport, and the municipalities concerned. Let us deal with this roads because it has a bearing on the taxes, the income that a National Treasury would be receiving from SARS if the roads are going to be in this condition. I'm telling you that lake has got a name, but I'm not prepared to give that name here because it's Anamali to be sued. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Honorable Sarupen, any addition?
No, Chair, no additions from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Matafa.
None from me, Chair. I'm covered. Thank you very much.
Honorable Mlenzana.
No, thanks, Chair. Just one thing. You know, Chair, excuse me, my interest has just been aroused by the parting shots of this presentation, where ESCOM and others are just mentioned in passing. And now I had a second thought that let me check with Dr. Mampo and the team. Are there no money issues related to ESCOM's load shedding? I'm raising this, Chairperson, because I held my breath during the ESCOM Parliamentary Committee saga. For I wanted to avoid the situation that at the end of the day, the whole thing would be thrown back to us in terms of money issues. I just wanted to check with Treasury. Thanks, Chairperson.
Honorable Lenzana, thank you. Let me just come in there. Do you want to expand a little bit? What do you mean by saying money issues so that they can be in a position to answer better to a question?
No, thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, Chairperson. I can see now you want me to dig deeper. Chair,
Okay.
look, no, I won't, Chair, but still I will try to navigate carefully. Chair, my worry would be a situation where ESCOM's failure, which ultimately results to load shedding, which has now begun to show its ugly face, would be part of whatever challenges that they have, that they are, shortchanged in terms of appropriation. I remember we had from time to time agreed on, special appropriations due to ESCOM. But if you remember, Chair, there has been a stage where now we said, no. we agree with the minister when he introduces his tough love approach to these state-owned entities, including ESCOM. So can't they cry foul that because of the introduced tough love to them, then they have now went back? Because now they are now, I don't know if they were a bicycle, I would say they would be pedaling backwards instead of forward in terms of implementation of their resolutions towards doing away with the challenges that they face as ESCOM. I think I've tried, Chair.
Perfect. Let me just add. Thank you, Honorable Lenzano. As you answer that question, Team Treasury, please just to jog our memories, how much has been allocated to the capital recapitalization of ESCOM, I think from 2008, and then again the allocation that we're having in the MTF, and the allocation that we're having this year to ESCOM, as we try to answer that question. Honorable Kaiso, anything that you'd like to add?
No, I'm fine, Chairperson.
Honorable Tlangwini, anything from your side? Honorable Tlangwini? Okay, thank you. Let me join the oral members, my colleagues, to thank Team Treasury led by Dr. Mampo for the presentation on the two bills before the committee. Let me start where Honorable Sarupen ended. I think in him posing the question, he also decried the fact that we haven't had the Minister of Finance appearing before the before SCOA. I think that can be arranged, but to facilitate that process through Darren oral members, if you could just identify those issues and send them to Darren, that as the minister comes and address the SCOA, would direct him so that we at least are covered, to know that the issues that we would like him to cover are covered. So that would be my first response to latch on to what Honorable Sarupen was requesting. So Minister can always be requested to appear before us, and let's raise those issues. Ms. Hadebe, just again to the payment for financial assets, right? In your appropriations, just to explain that again, what is it exactly that we are paying for there? Okay. Then my next question, I think in the next financial year, we're going towards the primary attainment of primary budget, a primary budget surplus. My question is, are we not rushing towards the attainment of the primary budget surplus? And in the light of, for instance, all these challenges that we're having, it's an important fiscal indicator. But I'm saying the opportunity cost of doing that. What's your take? My next question is, we are having the departments which are getting additional funding. So I just want to check whether you did check the history of their performance as far as budget is concerned. Because I know that departments do always want more money, but would you say with some level of confidence that we're giving you additional fund, your history as far as spending is concerned, it's a good one, right? That's one that is in particular underspending. That's one. But two, the question of efficiency of that spending. Seriously, are we getting value for that money that we, because money important as it is, in economic speak, they'll say it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to proper service delivery. So are we getting efficiencies, especially with the departments which are getting additional funding? I think it's Honorable Tlangwini and Honorable Peters who spoke about the Department of Defense. This committee had an opportunity of an oversight of Department of Defense. We'll say the obvious, the importance of that department as far as the security of our country is concerned. You'll also agree with me that there's a direct bearing to the destination of investment and how secure our country is, which therefore talks to direct fixed investment, which talks to foreign investments, and therefore economic growth and employment creation. A state which is really very sorry state was shared with the committee, which is a result of decreasing spending. And I'll tell you, it's very easy to decrease on spending, especially when there's no war. But to prepare for the war, and God forbid we don't get there, it's not an overnight thing. It's a process. So I'm then saying there's definitely a need for additional budget for the Department of Defense. But again, we do have Presidential Employment Initiative. The history of the Department of Defense is that so many skills have come from that department. Many of the pilots, in fact, you'll find in South African Airways and many other airlines were trained by the Department of Defense. About Dr. Mampo, about 2-3 years ago, you remember when we were to the Val situation, we also ran to the Department of Defense to go and help us there. I'm then saying that as far as the allocation, budget allocation, with all types of allocations that we're having, I'm looking at the Presidential Employment Initiative. Is there no way of us intervening in that area? There are many other things, obviously, that we're still going to talk about as far as that department is concerned in our report and so on. But I'm just saying, what are the possibilities of getting something taking place there? And obviously, you can't speak of defense without talking about Denel in this instance. Its strategic nature and the role that it has played. It's one thing to give Denel money to pay creditors, but again, it's one thing for capital injection to make sure that it continues to play its role. And further that what Honorable Tlangwini was talking about when it comes to SASRA. Members of SASRA pay premiums. So you are right, Honorable Tlangwini. It's supposed to be an insurance company which it's self-sufficient, but it looks like it's getting a lot of money from our side, and we are having strategic companies like Denel, which we want to see them playing. They are in the security cluster. The security of this country depends on Denel. So the point is, Department of Defense and its institutions, what can be done now or during MTBBS. It is an area of concern for us. When we look at this next question, we look at COEs. We saw that Department of Higher Education and Training is said to be more labor intensive. But is Department of Higher Education and Training more labor intensive than DBE, basic education? Can we have a clarification on that? Oron Lenzana spoke about the possibility of a special appropriations coming before us because of floods in KZN. But add to that, there's a question of rebuilding of Parliament. Do we have any allocation to that? What is happening? Does Treasury know? Then lastly, let's accept that the main indicators like your unemployment rate, poverty levels, inequality are going the wrong direction. But here we are appropriating about 1.057 trillion through this bill. And then if you want to look at consolidated expenditures, about 2 trillion rand. What is it that is not being done properly? Because with this money, we would have expected to see some dent on these broad indicators, which you always say that our aim is to try and improve on them. Dr. Mampo and Ms. Radebe and your team, can you please respond to these questions? Let's go.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me ask Ravesh to deal with the questions on Sasria Eskom Dinel, Marumo to deal with the wage bill questions, and then the public finance team to deal with their specific questions. Then, once they finish, I will then deal with the political questions and the general questions. Is that fine, Chairperson?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Thank you. Ravesh, please go ahead then, Marumo.
Okay, thank you and good morning, Honorable Chairperson.
Morning. Morning.
Good morning, Chair. Chair, just to respond on the Sasria questions, I think maybe just to take a step back as well. I think just to remind the honourable members that Sasria basically will only pay out to those clients who have a Sasria policy. So, for example, if it relates to issues of floods, then Sasria won't actually cover that. Just in terms of the questions, in terms of the claims itself. So basically, just some history as well. I think in terms of the unrest in July, what has transpired is at the time, Sasria only had around about 10 billion worth of its own capital itself. And in terms of the quantum of the claims that arose from the July unrest was around about 32 billion. Hence, the 22 billion request from Sasria. And, as of the 14th of April, around about 20 billion of those claims has been paid. Now, in terms of the claim amount, in terms of what, which businesses have closed down, we are waiting for a response from Sasria on that. So as soon as I get one, we will then give a response in writing. And Chair, and I think just to respond to the question just around the dividends as well. So in terms of the dividends, in terms of the historic dividends that has been declared and paid over to the National Revenue Fund over the last 5 years, we've had Sasria pay around about 808 million in dividends. And just to highlight to the honourable members that only when Sasria or only when an entity is in a position to declare a dividend, that will only happen when they do declare or do register a profit. So if they are loss making, for example, they will not be then in a position to declare and pay a dividend. And this is what's been happening to Sasria, pre the unrest, where they've been having registered net profits, and hence they've declared dividends of 808 million over the last 5 years. Chair, to the question around Eskom in terms of just around what they have been provided for or to in terms of the support that's been provided. So you would recall, honourable members, that Eskom has been provided with a support package of 230 billion rand back in the October 2019 MTPBS, and of that amount, already 136 billion has been provided. In this fiscal year, which actually commences in April, there's 21.8 billion that will be then dispersed to ESCOM in this fiscal year. And then over the next 2 fiscal years, that is in 23-24, there's a further 21 billion. And then in 24-25, a further 24 billion. So in terms of the impact of load shedding, in terms of what has, how it has impacted, or how it has impacted, ESCOM, well, what they have been doing is obviously, using more, the open cycle, gas turbines. Now, in terms of the cost thereof, I'm not aware of the exact cost to date, but I know that they have used around about 5 to 6 billion in terms of diesel burn, but that hasn't meant that they would then, come back to us as the National Treasury for further funding. They would then have to find their, additional costs if they haven't budgeted for within the existing the existing cash flows, and also their savings as well. Then the question in terms of Denel, I think we've been having these discussions with Denel, with the Department of Defense and Arms Corps in terms of how do we look at the future state of Denel, in terms of what will the future state be looking like, and obviously from there, what are the non-core and the core assets, and if there will be any funding that will be provided, we need to know exactly what sort of funding will be required for this future state. But a lot of work has been done in terms of the actual Denel businesses also looking at selling off some of their non-core assets to also, to augment their internal, savings or their internal cash generations. So in terms of the work that's been done until now, that's the work that we are aware of. But obviously, there's still a bit more to be done in terms of just making sure that all the stakeholders are aligned to the future state. So we know, for example, what sort of funding will be earmarked for which parts of Denel. Chair, I think that's it from my side. Thank you. Over to you, Mampo.
Marumo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Doc, and good morning to the honorable members of the committee. My name is Marumo Make from the Treasury, responsible for remuneration analysis. I think there were 2 questions with regard to the wage bill, and the first one is around these issues of senior management salaries in the public sector, and then the other one is on with regard to the wage bill containment in terms of spending. And if there is any other question that I might have missed, Honorable Chair, I mean, we can be assisted and I'll be able to answer that. Just to start with the one on the salaries of senior managers in the public sector. I mean, and before I even answer, Honorable Chair, in terms of what is that we are doing, I mean, maybe if I can just give a little bit of a background in terms of the determination of the salaries, of these cohorts and the Treasury's involvement in those processes, and as well as the work that we are currently undertaking together with the DPSA and COGTA, to try and deal with some of the problems that have been raised. We've got senior managers in the public service, which are mostly in provinces and the national government, whose salaries are determined by the Minister of the DPSA in concurrence with the Minister of Finance. And the salaries there are always influenced by what happens in the PSCBC. So we wait for what happens in the PSCBC, and thereafter we then adjust their salaries so that we can deal with the creeping issues. And then we've got salaries of municipal managers and the managers that are senior managers that are reporting to those municipal managers, which are determined by the Minister of COGTA.
Sorry.
Also,
sorry, my apologies for interrupting you. Can you try as much as possible to show the videos and show your faces as you speak? Not unless there's a very serious challenge, but that's the main thing. I'll tell you that the production team, they want to see us, and people want to ensure that they're not talking to ghosts, they're talking to real people. Oh, there you go. So Maruma, please continue. Let's do that. Yeah?
No, thank you, Honorable Chair. Apologies for that. Yes, yeah, I was saying, I mean, there is the salaries of the municipal managers, I mean, which are determined by the Minister of COGTA, in concurrence also with the Minister of Finance. So we give concurrence there. And then there is entities whose salaries are determined by their boards. And we've got instances where some of the entities does write to the Minister of Finance requesting for concurrence, but not all entities are doing that. So I think what we've been, I mean, the trends that we've been observing, especially I think as it relates to entities, and I will also indicate, Honorable Chair, what we have done, we've tried to do in 2018. I mean, is that entities tend to just go ahead and implement their own salary increases. As I said, some get that do right to the minister, and then others don't. And it has also been raised, actually. I mean, you might have recalled, Honorable Chair. I mean, we just came from the Public Service Summit. I mean, the Labour Summit. And it has also been raised, I mean, in those platforms by members that are in the PSCBC, that they are seeing some levels of unfair wage disparities, municipalities, entities, and the public service. In 2018, I mean, as Treasury, we tried to issue a sort of a circular. It was not an enforceable instruction note, because we were advised legally that we can't be able to do that. To most public entities to freeze their wages, I think that was in relation to 2019-20 financial year. And what we've observed through that process, I mean, most of the entities came back to us and they were saying that, I mean, the issues of remunerations are embedded in their legislations, and as a result, they were unable to comply with that directive, etc. So which created a problem, and some, of course, did try and implement the directive. So I think that's where we started to identify the weaknesses in the system in terms of how the wage setting mechanism across all the public sector institutions. So we took a decision with the DPSA after our engagement with the labor unions and the PSCBC that we will embark on a process to review remuneration policies across all public sector institutions, with the view of making recommendations to Cabinet on the fair remuneration policy that can be adopted within the public sector. And we are working together with COGTA, because they are responsible for municipal managers, and few other departments are also part of the working committee that will form part of that project. And from where we are sitting, I mean, our view is that we probably, I mean, moving forward, needs to come up with some sort of a legislation, a single legislation that will govern the issues of remuneration, especially as it relates to public entities. We can exclude the SOCs in that legislation, because they need to run like businesses and compete with probably other big players in the industry. But with regard to entities that really, or that solely relies on government transfers, I mean, the entities that are listed in Schedule 3A and 3C of the PFMA, I think our view, and we've been issuing even in our guidelines that we issue before the beginning of each budget process, we always encourage them to align themselves with the public sector, I mean, with the public service remuneration strategy. But it seems like that has not worked. And our view moving forward is that as part of this review, we could probably recommend to Cabinet that perhaps we need to come up with a single legislation I mean, that can govern remuneration in those spaces. Because I mean, we've acknowledged from where we sit in that, I mean, the disparities that exist, I mean, between some of these entities and some of the department, and even when we look at in terms of the service that needs to be delivered, I mean, we don't think that it's fair. So all I'm saying is that there is that process, Honorable Chair, that is currently unfolding, and we hope that the process will help us to come up with a better dispensation. I mean, that will be fair across the entire public sector. Then in terms of the containment of the wage bill as it relates to spending, I think from where we are sitting and why we say department must remain within the budget. From where we are sitting, I mean, each and every department or public institution needs to plan as part of the budget process, and they need to also plan as it relates to their HR needs and align their HR needs with what they have in their budgets. And thereafter, and the ceilings are set based on those needs. And what we normally do to assist the process and make life easy for this department is that we issue a tool that we call the Human Resource Budget Planning Tool as part of the budget process to help the departments to align their HR needs with their budget, and we agree as part of the budget process. And as we conclude the budget process in terms of what their HR needs are going to be and how much are those needs going to cost. And when you implement that, I mean, we then monitor you against that, because it's a plan that you would have already yourself put in place. So hence we're saying that, I mean, for department, when we say they must remain within their budget, I mean, they must remain within their budget as it has been planned by them. So I think that is the strategy that we've been over the years adopting with national departments. Last year, we started introducing it to provincial departments. I think we'll go full force in the next budget process and fully implement this human resource budget planning in all provincial departments as well as national department, so that we can better, I mean, plan for our HR needs and better manage the wage bill as part of our containment strategy, rather than only just manage it on the agreement side of things. So I think that's what we mean by that department must stay within the budget that they themselves would have helped in setting those ceilings. Thank you, Mampo. I think those are the questions that I did manage to get hold of. But if there is anything that I might have missed, then I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Morning, Chairperson and honourable members. Julia de Bruin here. I've got three questions on my side. One, Chair, is for you. You wanted to know why is DET the labour intensive? Because the teachers are employed in the provinces. So the 400,000 teachers would be in provincial budgets. National Department of Basic Education only has about 700 employees, as opposed to DET's 30,000. Yeah. So that was just to fix that up. Then, Honourable Peters, you got stuck. It is the COVID TERS. It was early in the morning, ma'am. I can see after a long weekend, you forget the acronyms. So the benefit that the UIF gave in the beginning was the COVID TERS. And then for the actual July unrest, they initiated a new benefit called the Workers Affected by the Unrest Benefit, the WABU. And I can give you the latest numbers, but in the documents, in the E&E, by December 21, they'd paid 2,700 workers 10 million rand. And so obviously as they will clear that out, so the number will have increased. And if you want those numbers, I can get you those numbers and just send them to Darren. Then the Honourable Kaiso about the CCMA. The CCMA gets a R1 billion transfer from the vote of the Department of Employment and Labour. And their budget was not slashed, as we've tried to tell the committee and the unions quite a few times. In fact, in this budget, 120 million is added to the CCMA. So again, Honorable Kaiso, in the E&E, in the vote 31, which is employment at labor, at the end, there is all the detail of the 7 years, the preceding 3 years, the current year, and the forward-looking 3 years as to the budget of the CCMA and what they intend to deliver. So I really want to make that point. When we did fiscal consolidation, Chair, as you know, you yourself will have said this, there were no holy cows. So every institution and every department had to face up to the fiscal consolidation. It wasn't that anybody was given special preference, except for the 4 departments that were related to COVID. So thanks.
Okay, Mark, you may go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, honorable chair and members. If I understood the 3 questions that were directed to me, I look after the health and social sector departments. The first one, so why is National Treasury not supporting SASSA on awareness of SRD to the public who qualifies and so on? So, Honourable Chairperson, I don't fully understand this question. SASSA does a great deal of communication to the public on the grants, also on the qualification criteria for the grants on various forms of social media. They do have some budget for this. They also do have some accumulated surpluses, which we approve their accumulated surpluses every year. It is fully within the...
Sorry. Can I interrupt you so that I help you with what the question was about?
Yes, yes, Chairperson.
Yeah. Remember that Dr. Mampo at the introduction, he spoke about what is happening around the 300 SRD. Spoke about that, especially relating to, remember there was a communication from COSATU, which was talking about the 350 grant. I think the question of Honorable Peters revolves around that perhaps more could be done after having listened to Dr. Mampo explaining exactly what is happening, because we are under the impression that the response of COSATU was due to not proper communication or under communication. So that's where it comes from, not necessarily about everything that SASSA and DSD do.
Oh, okay, thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for that clarification. Specifically on the 350 means test, DSD is meeting also in NEDLAC today with COSATU and employers today to further explain the position they have taken on this. So they have done a fair amount of work on this. I think also that looking forward, we also need to look at certain, what other criteria might be useful in looking at the most appropriate access to the 350 grant. For example, what we have at present is if one has, for example, say one has a spouse of a policeman or an educator who then applies for the 350 grant, their spouse is earning a considerable salary, but the individual is able to apply and successfully get the 350 grant because they may not classify as getting income in terms of the grant. So it might be possible to devise a way where the means tests can be changed, but at the same time, one is able to keep the intervention affordable and sustainable. So DSD is attempting to communicate better. As I mentioned, they're in NEDLAC today, but I think there will be further discussion even within government on the feedback that is being given from COSATU and other parties. Chairperson, on the important question on the balance between welfare and job creation, and what is National Treasury doing about this? I think this is a very important question going forward also into next year's budget. particularly looking at what the president announced around what would replace the 350 grants from the following year. And I think this is a very important national debate, Chairperson, is, what is the correct balance between income support intervention and active labor market interventions. One of the members in our team actually recently pointed out to me a Twitter poll among young people where about 400 young people were asked what type of support they felt they needed, and whether for them, for example, the 350 grant or what types of interventions were most important. And at least 50% of the young people said that for them, labor market interventions were much more important. They were very interested in work opportunities, and that whereas a grant might be useful, that there are many other interventions that are required. So, Chair, within the Treasury, our minister is very interested in this mix, and he has asked us to work further on social assistance interventions, active labor market interventions, including public employment interventions and social security interventions. And he's asked within the Treasury that there be several streams of work done around this. Amongst people who in this meeting, Julia is leading quite a bit of the work on the active labor market interventions. Madiba is leading some of the work looking at the public employment programs. So obviously this budget included both a 44 billion allocation to the SRD extension, but also allocations towards the presidential employment program. So trying to get the mix between active labor market and social support interventions is a very critical question for our country at the moment. I don't think we have all the answers to these questions, and would continue to support the committee's input in this area. Chairperson, on the state pharmaceutical company, I have not heard recent progress. It's not directly under the health department. Rather, this comes through from the economic sectors. But the progress that that we heard several months back is not very positive. The progress is very slow. The infrastructure availability for this production is not really at a kind of level which is perhaps most desirable. The issues of the ability of the public sector to manage a new state-owned entity which would deal with manufacturing production, there are questions around that. Also the financing issues around it, but also the implications for the health sector on the pricing of and costs of medication. So, for example, if the state-owned company were to produce antiretroviral agents, to what extent would that bind the fiscus in its procurement and in the costs of those medicines? And would the companies pay more? A lot of these questions, Chairperson, have not been satisfactorily answered. And I think that's probably some of the reasons why the state-owned pharmaceutical company deliberations have been proceeding slowly. Thank you, Chairperson. Back to the next speaker.
Thanks, Chairperson and honorable members. My name is Rendani. I will deal with some of the issues raised specifically on defense. Let me link the issue on defense with a question raised by Honorable Mlenzana. I think he asked a question as to whether does this budget take into account the recommendations by Parliament. I'm going to link this because the Budget Review Annex A has got all the recommendations by various parliamentary committees, including the responses by the Minister of Finance. I'm linking this because there is one recommendation there, Chairperson, from the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans that says defense must be allocated funding to deal with their compensation issues, especially that compensation it's the cost driver in the department. You will remember on day one of the visit, Chairperson, I think it's Honorable Mare, if not mistaken, he was concerned with the composition of the budget being 60% compensation and then the rest spread between goods and services, capital, and transfers. The recommendation was made by the Portfolio Committee to say we must assist the department with an allocation to deal with their compensation issues. Your comment here, Chairperson, is that there's a need for additional funding in defense. Yes, I agree, it's necessary, but not sufficient. In the sense that you will remember in our discussion during your visit, Chairperson, that we discussed a whole lot of issues, one of which is that we also need some serious reforms, both in defense as a department and the defense industry itself, Arms Cordinal and other role players. Because without dealing with the cost driver in the department, which is COE, we'll hardly make progress. Even if we pump in money in there, we'll hardly make progress. Let me elaborate on this. During the visit, Honorable Ntlangwini requested for a detailed breakdown of personnel. I mean, you will see when you get it, that breakdown, that we are seriously in need of reforms. So the appropriation bill in front of you, it has got a 1.8 billion additional funding allocated to the Department of Defense so that they can begin to do something in terms of implementing the reforms, especially to deal with the compensation challenge in defense. So in the main, that allocation, it will be for the rejuvenation of the defense force. I mean, the age distribution will also give you an indication of where they are in terms of the age distribution and the need for reforms. And again, Chairperson, you will remember that even the defense itself, it appears to have scored on goals in the following two areas. For example, they made reference to, I think it's the PwC study that made them to do the so-called non-core functions, one of which is technical services, as well as the provision of infrastructure. You will have seen in that presentation, especially on infrastructure, where they were indicating that they can do things much cheaper compared to public works. I think that outsourced services given to public works, they must get it back if their presentation is correct, that they can do things cheaper. I mean, you also asked a question as to whether do we take into account historical spending, wastage, and things like that. So these are some of the things that we look at, and that's why I'm saying that, yes, I agree, funding is necessary, but not sufficient. It must be coupled with a whole lot of reforms and also dealing with wastage. Thanks very much, Chairperson and honorable members.
Good day, Chair and honorable members. I'm going to answer the questions on water, and the DDG will answer the question on transport. I have three questions that I need to answer. The first one is on bulk water and the identification of beneficiaries. So basically, bulk water goes to municipalities. And then in terms of a municipality's integrated development plan and the water services and development plan, water is then provided to communities. So beneficiaries are identified to this way. The second question I have is on Hammanskraal wastewater and being classified as a special project. This is, again, in terms of powers and functions, it's up to the municipality to do this. In this case, it'll be City of Tshwane that'll be responsible. And again, the plans of the city, so the plans that I have mentioned already, the plans of the city will need to include this project in it. And lastly, Henops River. The question on that and getting the budget allocation. and a capital transfer. River management is a water resource issue, which is actually a national function. So what happens in this case is that if a river is polluted, or if a municipality pollutes a river, the polluter pays principle applies. So what happens then is that the department, the national department, will then issue directives to the relevant water services authority. And so that's how this issue will be addressed. Thank you. I don't have any more questions on water, so we can move on to the next respondent. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza. Thank you, Chairperson. So let me just deal with the ones that have not been responded to. So as Chairperson, in terms of the zero-based budgeting, what we did, and I think we presented some of these to the committee, we drafted what we call a framework for zero-based budgeting. Basically, what that framework does, Chairperson, it looks at how the different countries have implemented zero-based budgeting, what they have done. And from the learnings of those countries, we came up with a framework that we're going to follow as South Africa. That framework was presented to Cabinet and to the departments, and it was approved by Cabinet. The framework is on the National Treasury website. I will send through a copy of that, or a PDF copy to Darren, so that he can share it again with the honorable members. And we have started, Chairperson, with doing the spending reviews to try and find efficiencies in the system. We have done about 200 spending reviews, or we looked at about 200 programs that we assessed. The two departments that were piloted, that was the National Treasury and Department of Public Enterprises, but we actually worked with the rest of government to do this. What we are finding, Chairperson, which deals with also the point of the rental costs. Basically, what we found with the spending reviews is that there is no standard price that is charged on rentals, and accommodation costs are very high. So we have been discussing this with DPW, but these findings, Chairperson, are still need to be presented in Cabinet for the adoption of Cabinet before we can come to Parliament to present the findings on the spending reviews. Yes, Minister Kodongwane supports the project. Of course, it's a continuation of what was approved by Cabinet. But as you may be aware, he is still looking through these proposals that we have, because they have significant implications, Chairperson. So, for example, part of what we have seen in the spending reviews are a duplication of functions. Now, a duplication of function means if you have to consolidate the function, there are going to be people that will be losing their jobs, or you have to find them something else to do. So it's not an easy thing just to say with the duplication of function, consolidate the functions. We also need to think of what is it that we need to do to deal with the consequences of that. We have identified several public entities and departments that we think from a spending review perspective should either be closed down, should be consolidated, some of them should have shared services, and some must be put back into the main departments. But the question still remains, Chairperson, is what do you then do with the people that will no longer be providing the service? And that is a conversation that we need to have as government before we publish this, because the moment you publish it, it means you have a plan on dealing with some of these issues. Another thing, Chairperson, that I think aligns to these zero-based budgeting and spending efficiencies is that we have created departments to try and resolve a problem. So we have created a department called Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. That department was mainly, its function is mainly to look at government buildings and also government infrastructure. But what we're finding is that because the portfolio can be so big, there's other issues that the department is struggling to deal with. That's why you have a department such as Defense that is already asking for their buildings to be moved from DPWI so that they manage their own buildings. So while we have departments that are specific for specific purposes, sometimes it's very difficult to manage the system as a whole. But we have highlighted all of those issues in the spending reviews that we embarked on last year, and hopefully we will get guidance from Cabinet on what and how do we implement some of these findings. Other findings, Chairperson, relate to the changes in legislation. Others relate to changes in policy. So there isn't one project where we can say, for example, this is a low-hanging fruit, therefore we can just quickly close down a program. I mean, there's always the difficult trade-offs that need to be done by Cabinet in order for us to start realizing all of these benefits that we can realize. But as I said, the consequences thereof need to be dealt with very sensitively by Cabinet. I am hoping, Chairperson, that I will have the opportunity to present the spending reviews to Cabinet, and then if Cabinet adopts the spending reviews, we can then come and present them to Parliament. But I'm waiting for my minister to give me a go-ahead on what needs to be done. Chairperson, in terms of whether this budget has responded to the need, I think what we need to think about is what is the complete package of the budget. And I think Edgar or the budget office team would have presented this when they were presenting the fiscal framework. But the gist of it, Chairperson, is that one, we have to look at helping the most vulnerable in our society. We had to also look at how is our debt portfolio looking like? And then thirdly, we had to look at the potential to get additional funding. Can we get additional funding from the tax perspective? So what we realized, Chairperson, is that there is so much a budget can do in terms of responding to the complications that we face as a country. That's why in chapter 2 of the budget review, we focus on economic growth. We focus on structural reforms that can help us grow out of this dungeon that we find ourselves in. So basically, while we have programs that can help deal with the unemployment challenges or job challenges, what we're also looking at is how do we enable the environment for the private sector to come into the system to absorb these or to try and help us deal with the jobs. But Chairperson, you still have big problems. If ESCOM cannot really service the country given the current growth rates or the expected growth rates, even if we have so many structural reforms, the fact that there is no energy capacity to move us forward, you can implement some of these, but there's certain specific reforms that are so critical for us to move forward, and those would be the structural reforms that we need to focus on. Another thing, Chairperson, that we need to start looking at, and I'm hoping that the committee can help us in those discussions, it's the discussion of trying to explain and understand what is the source of the unemployment rate or the source of the unemployment and what type of people are affected, because the key thing is that we have a basic education that is funded by the state. We have higher education that is funded by the state. We even have TVET colleges that are fully funded by the state. Now, what the question we need to answer is our education system sufficient enough to produce people that can be absorbed in the labor market, or do we have to start looking at our education system to see whether are there any possible ways in which we can shape the policy such that when the students leave the schooling system, they have the required skills that they can be absorbed in the job market. So not only focusing on the grants, which are very critical, but also focusing on how do we skill our people so that when these job opportunities that we're talking about that must be created, eventually get created, we can absorb our people into this job market. So it's a combination of ensuring that we have structural reforms that are enabling us to have growth, which is mostly energy, but also the skill set that is needed. We need to start investing in that and making sure that our policies are aligned to the skill set that is needed. Another problem that we're going to see, Chairperson, would be when we do climate change and green energy. Do we have enough capacity as the country to change the skills towards such a big change that is going to happen eventually? So it's inevitable that we're going to get to clean energy, we're going to get to climate change issues. Do we have the tools in our education system to channel or to change the policies that we have so that they can train our people to be able to absorb those new opportunities in the future? I think that's what we need to do. Chairperson and honorable members, the good thing is that the budget process in its current form takes consideration of the floods. So we have a disaster management act that was implemented or that was drafted for the disasters. So when we got when KZN experienced a disaster, it wasn't a shock to the system. It wasn't something that we cannot deal with. We have been dealing with the disasters for some time now. So Chairperson, there are different ways in which this disaster is going to be funded. The first one is looking, and we have presented these to the department and to the committee that is dealing with this, the Extended National Joint Flood Coordination Committee. So we presented this. So the first thing is that the municipalities, their financial year ends in June, and it doesn't end in April like a normal department or a province. Therefore, they can use some of the money that was allocated for the grant to augment some of the funding that is needed for the disaster. We have allocated money for human settlement and COGTA in terms of disaster grants. That's about $1 billion or so a year. That money can certainly be used to augment the funding for the disaster. Thirdly, Chairperson and honorable members, the financial year has just started. It's only a month. So the departments have a sufficient amount to basically move some of the funding that is appropriated to deal with the disaster. The Chief Procurement Officer also issued regulations that clarify to departments when dealing with the disaster and the agency of the disaster, what condonation do they need, what exemptions do they need? Do they need exemptions? So that circular was circulated, or that those regulations were circulated to the departments. Then, Chairperson, if despite all of these reprioritizations that we are doing, the money is not sufficient, the departments can certainly apply for unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure, which is something that we consider at around June, July. We're going to get those applications. So we're going to use the contingency reserve to basically deal with the funding requests. So for now, Chairperson, we don't foresee us as the Treasury coming with a special appropriation bill, given the mechanisms that already exist in place to deal with disaster funding. So what we have had so far is few departments who came to apply for reprioritization. Some of them came to apply for early release of funding. We have supported all of those proposals, and we're working with the different departments to make sure that Treasury is not a blockade in releasing the funds. But at the end of the day, Chairperson, the Disaster Management Act provides the steps in which the departments can follow can follow to make sure that they follow the right procedure to do this. And the National Disaster Center is the core on which the applications go there, and the proper assessment is done before funding can be allocated. So how we're looking at the disaster, Chairperson, is that we're looking at the immediate release where funding is already there and it's within the departments, and then we're going to look at how do we rebuild. And the President has announced a committee that is going to look at the procurement of some of these projects. So that would be in the medium to longer term, but in the immediate term, providing shelter, providing food, the budget process allows for flexibility of moving funds. Therefore, we don't foresee coming to Parliament for dealing with that. Chairperson, in terms of the funding for Parliament, we have had a lot of engagement with Parliament, Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, and the Treasury, and there's different proposals that are put in place, but Parliament is still to do the assessment and the cost of this, so they are doing that, but we're working with them to make sure that when the assessments are done, we can easily assist them in how to move forward and in terms of the funding. They have different options, Chairperson, on how do we look at the short term and how we can link the short term to the longer term of rebuilding Parliament and all of those proposals. So we have had a meeting with the acting secretary and the DG of the Treasury where we highlighted, or when they highlighted what they require from us, and we're working with them on that. I don't think the funding of Parliament is going to be an issue that will require special attention. This is an event that was not foreseen, and of course we can definitely look at that when we do the unforeseen and unavailable expenditure applications that are going to come through the medium-term budget policy statement. The presidential employment intervention in terms of the cash flow, Chairperson and honorable members, I think here what we do is we definitely get the departments to account for what has been paid for, but the presidency deals with the implementation, and I think they can definitely give more detail on whether the money gets to the people on time. But I mean, with all of these program, Chairperson, there's always delays. Some of the delays are due to the request to deviate from some procurement issues or delays in implementation or systems delays. So there's always delays, but all in all, we have tried to provide an update in the budget review. So on page 54 of the budget review, it just shows what we plan to do with the amount and what or how many targeted jobs we're thinking about and what the budget allocation is. But most of these proposals, Chairperson, are looked at between us and the presidency. I think the other question on Sanral non-tolls, Chairperson, unfortunately, the fact that a decision hasn't been made on dealing with the e-tolls, Sanral remains in a very difficult predicament, and we cannot avoid it. So in the past, Chairperson, as you would know, the way in which we funded Sanral was a combination of looking at money for PRASA, where PRASA was underspending, but also we had to look at taking some of the non-toll monies to deal with the e-toll debt. If we don't want Sanral to default, we have to either make a decision on e-tolls, or it's not even an either or, and then fund them on the debt that they need to redeem. So without us having a clear guidance of what we're going to do with e-tolls, we will continue to use some of the money that is targeted for e-tolls to deal with the debt. However, Chairperson, there was a road endeavor that took place much earlier this year, and those those discussions took place. And we also, I mean, there's possibilities that the provinces can appoint SANRAL because it's very efficient in implementing or constructing these roads. The provinces can appoint SANRAL to do this. But with SANRAL, if we don't resolve the issue of e-tolls, we're going to be stuck with an entity that is very good at what it does, but it doesn't have capacity to do what it has to do because no one wants to fund it, given the fact that we haven't made a decision on e-tolls. Chairperson, on your question on whether we are not rushing the primary budget surplus, I think there's a couple of considerations there. The first one is our worry about the current debt servicing cost as a share of revenue. We're paying a lot of debt servicing costs, Chairperson. And if you look at, which is what was our biggest worry, when we look at the composition of spending relative to others, you can see that the debt servicing costs are about 1 trillion, and this is just under social development, which is just over 1 trillion. So if we don't push Chairperson to try and reduce this debt servicing costs, basically they are going to crowd out completely government spending. I mean, they surpassed health, community development, and peace and security. So if we don't reduce the debt servicing costs, then we won't have sufficient funding to deal with government priorities. So that was the first issue, Chairperson, that we had to consider. The second issue that we had to consider was the cost of the borrowing, because the market doesn't think we are capable of managing our debt and our fiscus. They are charging us such significant interest rates in borrowing us the debt. So that in itself is not sustainable. So if we can bring our debt down and make sure that it is sustainable, then it might reduce the debt servicing costs. Then the third issue, Chairperson, that we had to consider was the issue of the redemption. So when we were dealing with the 2008 crisis, dealing with COVID, we entered into short to medium term debt. So the redemptions are coming in fast. And what we're trying to do is not to pile up more debt, but to deal with some of the redemption pressures that we're going to have to deal with over the next coming years. And then, Chairperson, in terms of the additional budget, especially that we are presenting to you as the committee and the efficiency of spending, I think what we need to just look at is the type of spending that we are proposing to you. So, Chairperson, if you look at the spending, basically the 44 billion is money that will be given to the vulnerable. If you look at the provincial health, that money is mainly to deal with the COVID pressures that we're going to have. And you're right, in terms of that amount, we need to make sure that when this amount is spent, Treasury does do a job in ensuring that the money goes to services that we need, and that also applies to the local government equitable share. But the other amounts, Chairperson, are mainly for paying for the presidential youth intervention. The provincial education is mainly for salaries. And then for the higher education, this is a commitment because the students are already in the system. That amount we have to pay, the 7.7 billion, is to make sure that the 2021 cohort can continue with their studies. So, Chairperson, what seems to be a difficulty here is that most of the money goes to current expenditure, which is of course critical, but we haven't really had allocations for infrastructure projects. And this has been an argument that we tried to make in the past, that we need to change the composition of spending from current to capital. But unfortunately, the pressures that we are presenting to you are pressures that are so significant, important, and also by law, we had to allocate funding for those. But of course, for the ones where for example, the local government equitable share, some of the monies to deal with the floods of KZN from 2019 already. We need to make sure that that spending and accountability is done and is transparent, and we can report to Parliament. We have also asked the department's chairperson, even if the money is within their budget, allocated budget, that they need to report to the Treasury on how much they have spent for the floods and what was the purpose of the spending, so that there's accountability and we can present it like we did with the COVID-19 budget allocations that we did. Chairperson, I think I have covered the rest of the question. Just one, Mpumi, can you just come in to explain to the chairperson the spending on financial assets, please? Thank you, chairperson.
Thanks, Mampo. So, Chair, very quickly to address your question on what payments for financial assets are. So these would mainly consist of lending to public corporations or making equity investments in them. So for example, the allocations for recapitalization to ESCOM and the Land Bank are classified as payments for financial assets because they get expensed as payments against the National Revenue Fund. Just to also add, Chair, that generally departments don't budget for payments for financial assets because of the nature of the transactions that fall under this item. But in those instances where we have recapitalizations, you find that because we know of them in advance, we would then include that in the budget. But other items that also fall under this category would include thefts and losses that departments have to incur during the course of the financial year, debt written off, for example, money that is owed to the department for some or other one or other reason that cannot be recovered and has to be written off, would also be classified as part of payments for financial assets. Then you would also have other items such as your exchange rate losses that a department, let's say like the Department of International Relations and Cooperation would incur as part of these items. So it mainly relates to all those type of transactions that have to do with money and payments related to that. Thank you.
Chairperson, you're on mute.
My apologies. No, I was saying Dr. Mampo and your whole National Treasury team, thank you for the presentations and the engagement with the honorable members on many issues. It's very clear that honorable members have raised very important issues, and some of them are not just event issues. We must continue engaging on those issues. I think that's what is also coming from your presentation. And I think another take honorable members, the honorable members have raised the issue of us engaging with the minister, and definitely we must take that one up. As I've said, that I would like us to start the process, just throwing the issues that we'd like to the minister to to address us on. Some of them have been coming up and again in our engagements. And then again, from the estimate of national expenditure book, the thick book, there are details there about different expenditures and even the historical nature of that spending. Yeah, that takes us to the end of the presentation by National Treasury. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And let's go to the minutes I'm just checking the date of the minutes.
Chairperson, we've got a program.
Yes.
Program
Oh.
first, Chair, and then the minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can you please fly to the program, please? Okay, Darren, can you please take us through?
Hey, Chairperson, today we are Tuesday, 3 May is today's meeting. Tomorrow we've got PBO on the 22 Adjustments Appropriation Bill, on the 22 Appropriation Bill, as well as the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Tuesday, the 10th of May, we've got the FFC. We'll be commenting on the two bills. Wednesday, the 11th, we've got briefing by Sasria on the 2022 second Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Tuesday, the 17th, Chairperson, we've got a briefing by Department of Public Works and Infrastructure on Appropriation Bill. Wednesday, the 18th, Department of Police on Appropriation Bill. Tuesday, the 24th, Department of Water and Sanitation on the Appropriation Bill. Wednesday, the 25th, Department of Employment and Labor. And Friday, 27th, we've got Department of Social Development also on the Appropriation Bill. Tuesday, the 31st, Chairperson, we will have public hearings on the Appropriation Bill. And then on Wednesday, the 1st of June, we will have public hearings on the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill. And then we'll also give National Treasury an opportunity to respond to the recommendations made by the stakeholders on the 22 Appropriation Bill. On Wednesday, the 8th, Chairperson, which will hopefully be our last meeting, we are going to consider and adopt the committee's reports on the Appropriation Bill and the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Thank you, Chairperson.
Honorable members, that's the proposed program for the rest of the term. As you can see, that mainly it's about the appropriation bills. Can you proceed on the basis of this program, honorable members?
Yes,
Chairperson. Chairperson, Mlenzana here.
Okay, I hear you, Honorable Mlenzana.
Just one little question, Chair, before I move.
Please.
If Darren can just scroll down to the date of the debate. Yes. Okay. Is that 14th, Chair, confirmed? Because I would like that we also, when we adopt this program, include it. What Darren ended with the 8th. I know, of course, the 14th is not ours, it's for Parliament. But if then it is confirmed, I move, Chair.
Darren, before Mlenzana moves, can you respond to that?
Yes, Chairperson, that date is in the second term program of Parliament that was adopted by the programming committee. So yeah, that is the confirmed date, Chairperson. However, it might change. As you know, things can change.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Mlenzana. Just wait before you move. I want to hear Honorable Sheikh.
No, Chairperson, it's fine. I will second that.
Okay.
That's thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mlenzana, okay, then you can continue.
Thanks, Chairperson. I move.
Second arm.
I second, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Sheikh Mam. Seconds. Thank you so much. Then can we go to the minutes of the 16th of March 2022? Honorable members, they were sent to us. Do I have the mover for the adoption?
Matafa, I move, Chair.
Matafa moves. Seconder.
Kaiso seconds, Chair.
Honorable Kaiso seconds. Can we go to the minutes of the 22nd of March 2022?
Chairperson.
Honorable Peters.
Can I raise something? You know, on the 22nd of March, I had a serious IT problem. And by the time I connected to the meeting,
Honorable Peters, what happened? what happened to your video now? You were okay now, Uchegi, can you just?
I don't know, it has minimized itself. And again, I'm not a tech person. I don't know what happened. How do I deal with it? You see, these are the challenges I'm facing every time. Let me switch it off, Chair.
So
earlier on, it was dancing. Now it has halved me. Can I speak, Chair?
Continue, Honorable Peters.
Yes, on the attendance, Chairperson, I feel aggrieved because it's not like I deliberately absented myself from the meeting. And unfortunately, you taught me how not to remove my messages, and I got the message that I sent to you on that particular day when the machine was saying to me, I must open the meeting, because I couldn't understand why it says I must open the meeting when it was already past 9 on that particular day. But when I contacted the whip of the African National Congress in the SCOA committee, I couldn't get hold of him. I tried the secretary of the committee, Mr. Arendse, I couldn't get. So I sent you a message. And then because I couldn't send you a message, I thought you were chairing. When I sent you a message, it was going for almost past. And you said to me that the meeting is over. I couldn't even believe. I even said, oh, this chairperson is so punctual. The meeting is finished in less than 30 minutes. And I raised it. I sent Mr. Arendse yesterday a message, and I sent you also a message, Chairperson, just to, I know I was not in the meeting probably because of the technical glitch, but to be reflected as absent. I did not submit an apology. Maybe in future I've learned a lesson to say that I must be preempt a possible glitch and submit an apology in advance in the event I don't get connected. But I didn't know that I would not get connected. Just coming from a holiday and then I don't get connected, and the meeting is the shortest of all the meetings. And I just said, I must raise it in the meeting officially. I don't mind if it remains as absent, but I would have raised my concern that the technical glitch, and Mr. Sally from IT also knows about it. He's been helping with the process. Honorable Matafa also has advised me on how to deal with this particular issue. And I'm happy the Chief Whip of the ANC picked it up also, that MTN service provided members always have a connection problem. But one time MTN told me that their engineers are busy with something, and those engineers were busy for the whole day. Every time I call them, the engineers are still busy. But that's fine, Chairperson. I thought I must raise it.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Let me just confirm that you consulted me, saying you were trying to connect. Honorable members, guide me, but I think that should appear as an apology more than an absentee, an apology with a reason, which is something which is beyond members' control. I think it does happen with most of us. That's my proposal. Any valent objection to that?
I'll support your proposal, Chairperson.
Okay, let's
supported, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Let's Darren, in those instances, I think we should reflect as an apology and put a reason why that apology, because it's something which is definitely beyond the members' control. Thank you. I think we'll do that. So March 22 minutes with that amendment. Can we have the mover for the adoption?
I move, Chair.
It is Honorable Kaiso moves for the adoption of the minutes of the 22nd of March 2022.
Matafa
Second now. Matafa second. So that's the minutes of the 22nd of March 22 have been duly adopted. Any announcements coming from your side, Darren?
No, Chairperson, nothing. I'm going to send the link in the next half an hour for tomorrow's meeting, Chair.
Thank you so much. Can I take this opportunity to thank honorable members for their attendance and their contributions, support staff, the members of the public, the media on the platform. The budgeting process should be a transparent and open process, so that the issues that we are dealing with are issues that the members of the public out there are very much aware of, and even the challenges, the budget challenges, the fact that there are so many ones and limited resources. All members, that takes us to the end of the meeting. Let's meet tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Done. Thank you. Are we done? We're done, eh, Darren?
We are done. We are done, Chairperson.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thank Darren for the effort of bringing me into the meeting. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.